People often overlook the fact that the United States was founded because of a refusal to pay high taxes. The colonial period of American history lasted almost 300 years. It saw discoveries, revolution, and the shaping of a future country. From 1492 to about 1763, several countries made their play for the land. France, Spain, and England all attempted to plant their flag on the North American continent. Each country staked a claim, but it seemed England was the true victor, at least in the modern United States. But ultimately, the pioneering, inventive, and scrappy colonists earned their freedom and rights to the land. The road to revolution began in 1763. To their credit, the colonists did attempt to compromise with Britain before rebelling against it. Before the land became the United States, it was known as the 13 Colonies. Those colonies first took shape in the early 1600s. The English settlement of Jamestown in 1607 marked a new beginning. Much exploration took place between the late 1400s and the early 1600s. France, England, and Spain, among other countries, had economic reasons for attempting to expand their empires. The rivalry between European nations began as soon as Columbus returned from his expedition. The New World became the envy of European sailors in the Age of Discovery. Amerigo Vespucci, Juan Ponce de Leon, Ferdinand Magellan, Giovanni de Verrazzano, Jacques Cartier, and more explored the Americas and claimed territories for themselves and their sponsors. The early years of the Age of Discovery showed Spain's interest in unclaimed domains, as Hernán Cortés destroyed and conquered the Aztec Empire, while Francisco Pizarro did the same to the Inca Empire. The Portuguese were eminent sailors, but political instability and military defeats in Africa in the latter half of the 16th century hampered their ambitions. Meanwhile, England, Holland, and France used the idea of the Black Legend to strip Spain and Portugal of lands left in their control. The Black Legend was propaganda by rival European nations that the Spanish were particularly cruel toward natives. England and Spain remained allies for several years. However, the low-key rivalry heated up after Queen Elizabeth I took the throne in 1558. As a Protestant, she differed from Catholic Spain, so the relationship between England and Spain was strained. The Queen invested heavily in the Royal Navy, allowing her to build her defense. Elizabeth had opted mainly for a defensive foreign policy, but her navy delivered outstanding results, allowing her to widen her horizons. With a rising navy at her beck and call and new continents to explore, who could resist? Francis Drake marked the beginning of England's efforts to push back against the Spanish Empire. He circumnavigated the globe, with his expedition lasting around 3 years, from 1577 to 1580. His travels took him to the West Indies. When he neared Mexico, he attacked Spanish settlements and ships, taking the loot back to England. Thus, the rivalry between England and Spain intensified. Skirmishes broke out when the English arrived in parts of the New World the Spanish were exploring. In 1586, Elizabeth I prepared to push back against Spanish retaliation. Drake took care of the Spanish at Cadiz, with the battle lasting for over 36 hours. Researchers believe England felt that a war with Spain could not be avoided. Thus, they struck first. Drake entered Cadiz and surprised the Spanish who stood guard. By raiding Spanish resources, the English successfully weakened Spain's position. When the Spanish Armada reached the English Channel in 1588, they were easy pickings, especially since the weather acted in England's favor. Defeating the Spanish Armada marked the turning point for England. The English could journey to the New World without the Spanish acting as a barrier. Plus, the English landed in the north, whereas the Spanish explored the southern areas of the Americas. Sir Humphrey Gilbert, tasked with colonizing the Americas, claimed Newfoundland for England. Sir Walter Raleigh set up the first English settlement in the New World, Roanoke. These explorations painted the broad strokes of what would become the future 13 colonies. The English had sufficient reasons to take on the Spaniards. Part of the desire to expand to the New World came from the growing population in Europe. For instance, by 1601, England had a population of over 4 million. The ever-increasing population led to unemployment, insufficient food supplies, and crowded lands, leading to tensions between the people, which were only exacerbated by religion. Exploring the New World provided a viable solution. It also meant they could compete on the world stage. The Treaty of London was signed in 1604 between Britain and Spain, ending the nearly 20-year Anglo-Spanish War. The treaty did not change anything regarding land. Peace between the two countries would last until 1625. In 1606, the Virginia Company of London received its charter to establish a colony in the New World. Around 104 men and boys headed to found England's first permanent colony. The colony was officially founded in 1607 at Jamestown, Virginia. As the English mission across the Americas marched on, more colonies kept popping up until there were finally 13. The 13 colonies can be divided into 3 regions: New England, Middle, and Southern. The New England colonies included Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and other smaller ones. This area was great for fishing, hunting, and procuring lumber. However, it consisted of hills and rocky soil, which made it challenging to grow crops on a large scale. When the colonists first arrived in the region in the early 1600s, many Native American tribes, such as the Wampanoag, Pequot, and Narragansett, were already living there. Although the natives and the colonists traded with each other and even assisted one another, there were a lot of conflicts. The Pequot War and King Philip's War spring to mind. These conflicts wiped out a majority of the native population. Some Native Americans were sold to plantations in the West Indies as slaves, and many died from European diseases. Speaking of slavery, New York had an astounding number of slaves. By 1703, more than 42% of New York homes had slaves, leaving it behind only Charleston, South Carolina. New York was not a part of the New England colonies. It belonged to the Middle Colonies. The Middle Colonies also included Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. These colonies had more fertile soil than the New England colonies, which tended to be rockier. The Middle Colonies grew and exported many grains, such as hemp, wheat, and flax. They exported so many grains they became known as the breadbasket colonies. The region was also heavily forested, leading to the establishment of the lumber industry. Before the colonists arrived, the region was inhabited by Native American tribes, including but not limited to the Mohawks, Lenape, and Mohicans. The colonies embraced diversity, and there were times when peace with Native Americans was the norm. This diversity carried over to different ethnicities, such as Scottish, Irish, German, English, French, Dutch, etc., and religions such as Methodism, Quakerism, Calvinism, Lutheranism, etc. Slavery did exist, which is apparent in the high number of enslaved Africans in New York. The larger cities tended to depend on slave labor more, and they were usually used as domestic slaves. Still, the Middle Colonies did not rely on slaves for their economy as much as the Southern Colonies did. The Southern Colonies were comprised of Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Maryland. It would eventually grow to include the colonies of Florida, but the United States held them for only around 20 years, from 1763 to 1783. The Spanish maintained control over Florida for most of colonial America. Today, Florida is part of the United States because it was finally gained in 1819 through the Adams-Onis Treaty. The Southern colonies had incredibly fertile soil, access to waterways, and a warm, agreeable climate most of the year. Their winters were, and still are, relatively mild. It is no surprise these colonies produced most of the crops that were exported. They grew many things, but the most profitable were tobacco, rice, and indigo. Cotton was grown, but it would not become an important crop until the invention of the cotton gin in 1793. Fewer people inhabited the towns in the southern colonies than New England because the bulk of the land was used to grow crops. Native Americans such as the Powhatan, Cherokee, and Tuscarora called these colonies home long before the colonists arrived. The settlers' initial interactions with the natives were, for the most part, peaceful. But like in other colonies, these interactions tended to turn violent over time. It took time for slavery to take hold in the southern colonies, as many people started at the bottom and had to work their way to the top. The cash crops of tobacco, indigo, cotton, and rice began to be highly demanded, but these crops were labor-intensive to plant, grow, and harvest. The colonists turned to the African slave trade to keep up with demand. The southern colonies began to rely so heavily on slavery that the people could see no other way to keep the economy afloat. South Carolina was North America's largest importer of slaves, with over 58,000 Africans entering the colony between 1750 and 1775. Almost all of the slaves that came to the New World passed through Charleston first. During the colonial period, the transatlantic slave trade ensured that slaves continued arriving on the southern colony's shores. Traders would bring Africans over on large ships, where they were subjected to terrible conditions. The slave trade played a key role in the Declaration of Independence, the document written in 1776 to declare the colonists' independence from Great Britain. Thomas Jefferson, who was the primary author of it, condemned the practice of slavery in an early draft. Although he owned slaves himself, it is estimated he owned more than 600 throughout his life, he saw the institution as evil, imposing most of the blame on King George III. The issue of slavery was still debated during the American Revolution and afterward. Still, the institution was still intact to please the southern colonies, with more restrictions being placed on the practice over the years. Slavery in the United States would only end after the Civil War in 1865. The Americas would be colonized for many years before a wave of decolonization in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The United States was the first to achieve independence from the colonizers in 1776. Many other countries in the New World followed soon afterward. The seeds for freedom were planted reasonably early on. In 1651, the Navigation Acts were passed to curtail trade. Over time, the colonists learned how to survive on their own. They started to forge a separate identity from the mainland. The English sought to eliminate such ideas and created the Dominion of New England, among other laws and dominions, as a response. In 1733, Britain passed the Molasses Act. The act imposed a tax on molasses and sugar that arrived from colonies Britain did not own. About 30 years later, the Sugar Act was enacted. Although this act lowered the tax on molasses and sugar, it increased law enforcement. At this point, the 13 colonies were in a depression, and it was easy for the colonists to point to the law for keeping them dependent on Britain. Britain and the colonies also felt the effects of the 7 Years' War and the French and Indian War. The 13 colonies were separated from Britain by an ocean, which allowed the colonists to develop a form of independence that the Crown could not have imagined. One thing led to another, and with the American Revolutionary War, the United States turned into a former colony. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Colonial America, check out our book, Colonial America, a captivating guide to the colonial history of the United States and how immigrants of countries such as England, Spain, France, and the Netherlands established colonies. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.